All right, guys, welcome back to the third video of the Quantifier series. If you haven't seen these prior Quantifier videos, please make sure to check them out. I'll include a link here somewhere. But a brief little intro. My name is Cho. I am the founder and sole tutor at Impetus LSAT. I've tutored the LSAT for over 7 years now, and I've helped a lot of people achieve scores in the 175 plus range, many of which who ended up improving 15 or more points and ended up achieving attendance to schools like Harvard, Columbia, and UPenn. And so today, again, I'm going to be continuing our discussion within quantifiers. So far, we've talked about what the quantifier terms mean, what the different levels of strength are. So we have weak, strong, and absolute. We also talked about how to diagram quantifiers. And now we are going to talk about how to make inferences and what types of inferences we can and cannot make based on quantifier statements. And this is how the LSAT is very frequently going to try to trick us. So let's take a look at a few scenarios. So suppose I had the following diagram. So again, if you watched our prior videos, you would know that this means that most M's are P's, or most of M is P, and most P's are Q's, or most of P is Q. And take a minute and think about this for a second. Is there anything that we can infer about M and Q? It could be very tempting to think that at least some of M is Q, or maybe some of you even thought that most of M is Q. And again, it's very tempting to think that because we have this chain and we want to make these inferences. But believe it or not, we cannot make that inference. It's actually totally possible that M and Q have no relationship at all. It's possible that no M's are Q's. We just don't know. And I want to kind of illustrate this point to you. And the really important thing I want you to understand is, first off, if I know that most of M is P, I know that greater than 50% of M is P, right? And in order to verify if something must be true, which is what we're concerned about with inferences, we're going to test out the bare minimum and see what happens as a result, okay, and see if something still needs to follow. So pardon my terrible art skills here, but I'm going to draw a little circle. So this is M. Okay, so this is representative of all of M. And by the way, don't worry too much if you're having difficulty following with the letters. I'll also do an example with actual words as well. So, but let's say this circle represents the entirety of M, okay? Well, if most of M is P, of course, greater than 50% of M is P, right? So let's just say 51% of M is P, and that is P here. Now, yes, it is possible that this is the entirety of P, but that doesn't have to be the case if you think about it, right? Like maybe P is larger than M. That's also totally possible. Like imagine if we have something like this, and this is all of P. Still totally possible. Well, if that's the case, and greater than 51% of P is Q, notice how Q could be way over here. And notice how if that's the case, M and Q do not need to have any relationship. They could be completely separate from one another. So that is why we cannot make this inference between M and Q. Okay. Now, I know that can be a little bit confusing, but again, the really important thing is I want you to pay attention to this condition here. We don't know the size of this condition, meaning that condition could be way larger than what's being discussed before. Okay, so let's break this down in another way. We're going to use a real life example. And we're going to use the same example we discussed last time with, dogs being friendly, right? So, and we're going to use the same format. Remember, so we said most dogs are friendly. Okay? And let's say that we also know that most friendly animals are, I'm trying to come up with an example here off the top of my head, but it's totally possible that most friendly animals are cats. Okay? And of course, just from this alone, we can see that it's not true that some dogs need to be cats, right? It's very clear. But again, let's kind of look at it from the visual. So let's say this circle represents all of the dogs in existence. We know that most dogs are friendly, but notice how, again, if we apply our everyday knowledge, it's totally possible that there are friendly things aside from dogs, right? There's friendly cats, there's friendly elephants, there's friendly humans. So this friendly category does not need to be restricted to this particular portion. It could easily surpass that. And this could be all of the friendly animals out there, right? And then again, if that's the case, we do not need the cats to also be dogs, right? It could be that these are the cats here. And of course, again, just using our common sense, we know that dogs are not cats, right? So that's the really important thing here. It's not that they cannot be the same. It's just that they don't have to be. And again, that's what we're concerned with inferences, right? So in that case, when can we make an inference? Okay. And we're going to go back to the example with the letters. Most H's are V's, most V's are Q's. Okay, so let's say we have something like this. What would we need to change? Well, okay, so remember we said the reason why we can't make an inference, okay, is because V could be way larger than F. Or I'm sorry, V could be way larger than H. That's really what it comes down to. So let's say this circle here represents all of V. Well, what if I change this to a sum? Okay, well, if I change it to a sum, it's potentially even harder for me to make an inference. Now, this could be Q, right? And so an even tinier portion of V could be Q. And notice how, again, Q does not need to overlap with H in any way. So once again, I can't draw an inference here. The only way, if you notice, for me to make an inference is if I end in a condition. Now what happens? Well, now it doesn't matter how big V is, even if V is way bigger than H. If all of V is Q, this portion also has to be Q, right? Because again, 100% of V is Q. So what that now means then is no matter how big V is, Q is going to have to take up this portion of H, meaning it has to take up greater than 50% of H. So when it ends in a conditional specifically, that is when you can extend the quantifier down the chain, meaning I can actually infer that most of H is Q. That's the really important thing to keep in mind, okay? But it has to end in a conditional in order for me to draw that inference. Now, let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so what if I have something like this? Some R's are T's, all T's are J's. And I want you to think about this for a second. Feel free to pause the video. And I want you to ask yourself, is there any type of inference that I can derive between R and J? Okay, so I hope you thought about it. The correct answer is we can, because once again, we are ending in a conditional. And it doesn't matter that t can be way larger than s in this case. That is possible, but it wouldn't matter because all of t is j anyways. So in this case, we can then infer that some r's are j's. But remember, we can only infer to the extent of this quantifier. I can't infer that most r's are t's, or I'm sorry, I can't infer that most r's are j's or that all r's are j's. I can only infer that some of them are. Okay, now here's a tricky one. What if I have something like this? Okay. Now, this type of situation is extremely uncommon, but it really tests our understanding. And if we can understand this, we'll be able to understand the vast majority of things the LSAT throws our way. Now, in this particular case, it is still true that I'm ending in a conditional, but we have to be careful because that does not mean that I can draw an inference between R and K. I actually cannot draw an inference. And the reason for that is because I can't draw an inference between R and J to begin with, right? Because this is not a conditional. So if I can't infer anything between R and J, I can't continue on down the chain because now it doesn't matter that all of J is K. If I don't know anything about R and J's relationship, how am I going to know anything about R and K's relationship? It's impossible. Okay, so that's the tricky thing to keep in mind. So we don't want to just go on autopilot and think, oh, as soon as it ends in a conditional, I immediately know that I can make an inference. We have to kind of start from this end and work our way down. And if our flow of inferences ever gets interrupted, we cannot continue down the chain. If we can make an inference, then we can continue down the chain if it's a conditional. Okay, now what about a different situation? What if I have something like this? And remember, by the way, it doesn't matter what we replace R with or T with. None of that matters. These laws are still always going to apply in the LSAT world. Okay, so let's say we have something like this then. Some M's are F's, all F's are H's, and all H's are T's. Okay, well, in this particular case, if you notice, I can make an inference between M and H, right? And what we can specifically infer is that some M's are H's. And we know that we can make that inference because, again, we're ending in a conditional between M and H. And so we can draw that inference. Now, if I can draw that inference, I can continue down the chain because we have another conditional. So that in turn does mean that in this particular case, we can infer that some M's are T's. Okay, great. And that's really it. That's the main thing to understand within quantifier chains. Next video, we'll talk about how to deal with what are called quantifier tree situations. But keep in mind that for quantifier chains, this is when